And we're now live.
Hi, Jack. How are you?
Doing great.
Today is October 5th, 2020.
Oh yeah, we never say the date, so we never know when we publish things. We're gonna try publishing things right away.
Just in case, some time traveler is curious about the date.
Yeah, and today we were gonna talk about the presidential debate that actually took place a week ago. Was it a week ago today? No, it was on Tuesday, right?
So, last Tuesday, September 29th.
Okay, so a weekish ago we had the presidential debate, and we were gonna talk about that. Did we want to talk about anything else?
Nope.
Oh.
That's it. We're going to do a short podcast on what we thought about the first presidential debate.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, you can start. What did you think?
I thought it was a shit show. And I was very upset at Donald Trump for making it a shit show. But,
It wasn't particularly presidential.
yeah. And sadly, I think Donald Trump won that debate.
Well, I don't think you can win or lose a debate like that, but I don't think Joe Biden has lost any supporters during that debate, but I don't think Donald Trump has lost any supporters during that debate either. I really don't I almost feel like a lot of people saw that, and the people who support Donald Trump break down into two categories basically: assholes and Republicans who just believe in the Republican values and conservative values and want to support the conservative president. So I think the ones that are just conservatives who are supporting Trump because he's running on a conservative ticket regardless of what he is, I think those people are basically going to just suck it up and vote for him anyway. I mean, they already have to put up with so much with Trump that this is not going to change their mind. And I think that's, I don't know, maybe like half of his supporters. And then the other half are assholes because he is the king of the assholes. So basically, if you're an asshole, you are voting for Donald Trump. That's kind of like a given. And those people, he was never going to lose their vote to begin with, and that only encouraged them to vote for him. So that changed nothing.
And if you're a swing voter, you might just not go out and vote at all because the choices are very, let's just say bad.
I think the swing water voters who were going to swing away from Trump, and there is a few, like I know quite a few people, I don't know, like as a percentage of the people that I know, it's large because it's like 5 people who have voted for Trump before who are not going to vote for Trump this time around.
And they're committed to going out and voting.
Yeah, and they're committed to going out and voting for Joe Biden, not because they love Joe Biden, but because they really, really, really hate Trump.
That's interesting.
And this is people who believed in him in 2016 and liked his rhetoric, but then they saw his performance, and these are people who are usually. So I found a tendency.
What were they looking for? What kind of changes were they looking for?
Well, they were looking for all the changes that Donald Trump promised, meaning renegotiating with China, renegotiating with Mexico and Canada, renegotiating with our partners because these people were primarily concerned with the deterioration of jobs in America and having jobs being sent overseas, primarily to China and Mexico as well. A lot of the automotive industry has left to Mexico, for instance, right? So these were people who were very concerned about that, and they voted for Trump based on that ideal, right?
So they wanted Trump to create more jobs.
Well, not so much because see, we always talk about the job numbers and what the job numbers are, and we think that what people want is for Trump or somebody else to come in and just create any kind of jobs. But if you look at specifically at the kind of jobs that we've been creating for the last decade, pretty much, most of those jobs are low skilled jobs. Very low skilled jobs in retail and in food industry, which of course got crushed recently. Delivery, Uber, things like that. So a lot of service jobs, but they're very low skilled jobs that don't pay very much, right? And then I love it how the conservatives always those bootstrap type of conservatives always say like, oh, well, you need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, get an education, and be a valuable member, and then you'll get a job. And I'm like, okay, that's true. Like what you're saying is true, except those high-end, high-paying jobs, unless they're in finance or in programming, like tech, are not really available in America anymore, right? So,
Is it because we are inviting foreigners to come to America
well,
to take over those jobs?
that plus also we don't have those jobs. Like, so currently we're working on a project right now, right, where we are making a piece of electronics that's going to go into products in China, amazingly enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we are programming and making it here in the United States, right? So we're
Mm-hmm.
developing code. We're developing not just us, but several other people.
The boutique firm that we work for, basically.
Yeah, that we freelance for is developing it. So they're doing the hardware aspect of it, some parts of the hardware, and we're doing the upper end part of the hardware, basically the CPU, the stuff near the CPU we're designing, and then we're writing the code for the CPU. And we're using one of those Chinese chips, the ESP32 chips,
Mm-hmm.
which are very common, very popular, as the brain of this thing. By the way, ESP32, this is a sidetrack into China, or the Expressive as a company, is really something to look at as the unholy marriage of the Russians and the Chinese.
So the ESP32 is a microprocessor for people that don't know.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it's better than the Raspberry Pi or the Arduino. It's
Well, it's not better necessarily than either one of those before people try to pitchfork you.
okay.
But basically, it's if you line it up and you have Arduino and then you have a Raspberry Pi, and then this is for people maybe who are familiar with like electronics. We're using it for more industrial applications, so we're making our own PCBs and stuff like that. But I'm just kind of for hobbyist electronics, I would scale this like that. So you have Arduino. Then you have the ESP32, which is the chip that we're using,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have the full-blown operating system on the Raspberry Pi,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or one of those all-in-one boards that run Linux or Android or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a chip that has a really really tiny operating system on it. It's not really Linux or anything like that. It's just it's a scheduling operating system that just switches between tasks. It's called FreeRTOS, Real-Time Operating System, and it also has onboard Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and it all comes in a very tiny little package with the antennas for the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth already built in, so you don't have to do any kind of FCC work. And you solder it as a daughter board directly onto your PCB, and boom, there you go. And you have 2 cores to do your logic, and it's a pretty cool little chip. Right, and I'm kind of very impressed that it came out of a company from China. And Chinese are very good at doing hardware, but they are not so great at doing software. And the software was developed by a Russian team, so in combination, it seems like they did exceptionally well.
It's a very neat little board.
Yeah, and documentation for it is pretty good as well. Again, it's impressive that I'm not sure who's doing the documentation, but I believe it's Ivan, who's a Russian fellow on GitHub.
We'll have a final verdict of whether we like this chip when we finish the project.
Yeah,
right?
but anyway, so but my illustration in that was that this means that we basically have 2 to 3 more or less highly qualified people, even if I'm talking about myself, working on this project right now, right? And
Mm-hmm.
manufacturing it here in the United States. And if we actually finish the design, we're going to manufacture the PCB. Well, the PCBs are going to be manufactured still in China because that's just the way it is nowadays. And I'll tell you, by the way, I'll follow up on that story and I'll tell you why it is the way it is. But the rest of the product is going to be built and assembled here. We have an in-house assembly line that can do PCB assembly and pick and place, and we'll do it here. And that also requires one more person to run it, or 2 people to run that machine, right? So that's high-tech jobs, right? they're not the most advanced high tech jobs, but the dude, for instance, who works for the company that we freelance for, who runs their pick and place machines, right? That's a high tech ish job that pays not great, but okay. It's not great because the shop itself is not doing so well at the moment. But generally speaking, it's a kind of job that pays pretty well, right? And we can train a bunch of people. We can train a bunch of CNC operators. We can train a bunch of pick and place machine operators, right? This guy is self-taught and he's very good who runs their machine. But if we don't have those jobs, what's the point? Right? Like let's say the shop that we work for closes down, goes out of business, whatever, and the dude needs to find another job. He's gonna have a lot of trouble finding another job doing that same kind of work.
Yeah, I agree. Unless he becomes a Uber driver.
Yeah, but he's talented. He's good. He's good at what he does, right? But he does electronics. He does electronics assembly, and he can do. He doesn't do a lot of design, but he does a lot of assembly. He knows how to do all the electrical work on AC and DC lines, high voltage lines. He knows how to do assembly of tiny components, how to solder, how to desolder, how to do that kind of stuff. Maybe he can open up a repair shop and just run like a repair shop, repairing things. I think he's pretty competent in that regard. But there is not. But that's a shame. That's really truly a shame that a person like that wouldn't be able to easily find another job in America right now because those jobs don't exist. And it's not like the coal industry where it's an abandoned old industry.
Kind of in that same vein, the problem with Tuesday's debate was that they focused too much on personal issues. They did not ask questions about how are you going to create jobs? What's your vision for America? Past 2020 in this new decade when things are changing so rapidly. Instead, all the questions that were hurled at the candidates, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, were like, it looks like you did not pay taxes in these last couple of years. What's up with that? And can you please tell us why, you are not going to concede losing this election if you lose? These are important questions, but they don't inspire you to select a candidate based on their ideas. It's like,
well, neither one of them has particularly good ideas, to be honest. Especially, I mean, people harp on Joe Biden a lot, and let me back up a little bit. So one thing I feel is that Joe Biden actually performed better than expected in the debate.
He was very presidential and nice and empathetic and charming and whatever. He was all there mentally.
Yeah, mentally he was all there. He clearly has a starter. Now, I was in the camp of, no, he must be going senile earlier this year, because all the clips that they cut together, the short clips of him stuttering, make no sense, and he's not prepared, and it does seem like he's really losing his train of thought. But in reality, what it looks like is he's actually just stuttering. Because what happens is he gets to a word and then you can hear him pause and then he continues on with the word. It doesn't seem like he forgot where he was going. It seems like he's actually having trouble pronouncing the word, which, is a common enough occurrence, so I'm not going to fault the guy for that. What he said was logical. Unfortunately, he's not a very good wordsmith, maybe because of his stuttering issues or anything else. He's just like too nice, and he's not very quick on his feet.
So I think that led a lot of people to believe that Donald Trump dominated Joe Biden, and that Joe Biden's body language was kind of weak. He was not.
But you know what this sounds exactly like? This sounds exactly like that moment in Idiocracy where what was his name?
I don't remember any of the characters.
Whatever, the main character, Joe maybe or something like that. When he gets arrested and he's being tried. At the end of that, there is a narration that says, and then Joe proceeded to make an eloquent, concise, and logical argument of why he wasn't guilty. However, everybody in the crowd saw him talk faggy and thought he looked like a loser. Therefore, he was found guilty anyway.
Oh my god.
And basically, it's the same thing.
That's crazy. That's hitting the nail on the head.
Yep.
I think that's where we're at right now. Pretty much, you know?
I do believe that Trump's base is a bunch of idiotic assholes, and
we're separating
and people who vote for him for conservative reasons. Like, I'm not going to deny the fact that there's a lot of people who vote for him simply because they're conservatives, but
that's drawing the line between, you know, people who read newspapers, you know, like New Yorker or the New Yorker magazine or Wall Street Journal, and the rest of the population that reads nothing or watches YouTube conspiracy theories.
Yeah. Or, yeah, exactly. Or watches YouTube conspiracy theories. And it is also like the overlap between the conspiracy people and Trump supporters is also stunning. It is stunning and it's difficult to understand. Well, actually, it's not difficult to understand because that's what they use. I mean, I'm actually surprised that more flat earthers, or I'm actually it's probably true that all flat earthers support Donald Trump. It doesn't mean that all Donald Trump supporters are flat earthers. No, some of them are normal people, but probably all flat earthers support Donald Trump. The ones in America, obviously.
I don't know anything about flat earthers.
Well, it's a bunch of ludicrous idiots.
We should talk about them at some point in this podcast.
Yes, we should.
You should inform me about flat
earthers. There
are
millions of these people, millions, and they're insane. Oh my god. Okay, we'll talk about it later because it's a whole topic for its own thing. But what I found most telling, so the most telling moments in the debate, I'll cover those. One was when Joe Biden told a story which Donald Trump did not deny, about how during the press conference, not during the press conference, during one of his rallies, he was standing there doing his rally, and then afterwards, after the rally, a reporter tried to approach him, and he was yelling at the reporter. He was like, "Did you have your shots? Did you have your mask? Do you have your, did you get your blood tested for COVID?" Because he was terrified of COVID, right? And yet, just 200 feet away from him, in the crowds, there were people, hundreds and hundreds of people, and none of them were wearing masks.
Crowded together?
Yeah, crowded together. None of them were wearing masks.
Shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah, all of his supporters screaming into each other's ears. Yay, Trump, So that just shows it to you that he's concerned for himself. He's really not concerned at all for his supporters. He's not concerned. He doesn't care for people who care for him.
Well, we know that
he's a very selfish and
Trump is a very
individual.
narcissistic human who puts himself first before anyone else, and his interest in America is simply because it exalts him as a supreme human being who has had the opportunity to lead the world's most powerful nation.
Yeah, he's very much an asshole, and he very much deserves to lose this time around. And now that he has COVID, it's well, we'll talk about it later.
Well, according to all the blue media companies, all the Democratic media companies, the COVID situation with Trump, since he is COVID positive, has actually widened the gap between Biden and Trump, where the polls show that 53% of people are more willing to vote for Biden versus 41% of people voting for, maybe it's flipped, it's like 51% are willing to vote for, polled people are willing to vote for Biden versus 43 or 41% for Trump. So,
yeah, Biden is winning all the polls at the moment, yeah. That's what I read.
And Trump is getting a little desperate, where he today tweeted something like, "If you want the largest tax increases in this country's history, vote Democrat."
Mm-hmm. Oh, also, just keep in mind, by the way, all of the people right now, like maybe some of our listeners support that gigantic asshole. Keep in mind that like when they passed in 2018 or 2018, when they passed that tax cut, the the personal individual tax cut that all the people received and he was bribing people with essentially. That tax cut is sunsetting, and it's already sunsetting. It's sunsetting at 2022, I believe. And that automatically, that's written into the law unless they renew it. And they're not going to renew it. In fact, Mitch McConnell has already indicated that he's not going to renew it. And they're not even considering renewing it. And they're not going to renew it because they need money right now, because they spent a lot of money and they printed a lot of money and they will need to increase revenue. No matter what, they will need to increase revenue. And what's going to happen right now is you're gonna you're gonna see that after this election in a few years, as an individual, you'll be paying more and more taxes, but the corporations and the people at the top are going to be paying less and less taxes again and again and again.
But it has to be clear that you have to be like in the top 1% to pay less taxes, because people who make a couple $100,000 a year are paying more money.
Well, you can. Basically, what happened is what they did is they lowered capital gains taxes and they lowered corporate taxes. So the corporate taxes and the capital gains taxes will stay exactly where they are. The income taxes, which are the taxes on the income for regular individual people, the salaries and wages and such, they were lowered, but that was a temporary reduction. And in the law, it says that the sunset for that reduction is coming up in 2022. So unless it's renewed, which it's not going to get renewed because of the corona and all this other stuff, and again, Republicans have already indicated this much. So as a result of that, the all of the personal taxes for individuals will go back to the levels of pre-2018 levels, just like they were before. But the corporate and the capital gain taxes are going to stay low at the historically low rates. This is like as low as they've ever been. And the argument there is, well, trickle-down economics, that this is going to make wealthy people wealthier, and then wealthy people will hire more peons to serve them, and as a result, it will create jobs. Except over and over and over and over again, we have seen that this just doesn't work. Instead, wealthy people take their money and plow it into assets and cause asset price, increase.
Well, this is something we've seen since after the 2008 financial crisis.
Yeah. Tremendous asset price inflation in the upper echelons of the society.
And it's already blown up since this pandemic began, this coronavirus pandemic began in early spring of this year.
Yep.
We're just probably going to see more of it.
Yep. And we're going to see more and more wealthy people getting wealthier. And basically, if you have assets, you're going to do quite well in the next couple of years, regardless of whether it's going to be Biden or Trump. And if you don't have assets, you'll be fucked in the next couple of years. Good luck to you. And the president doesn't give a fuck.
What do you think the next 4 years would look like under Trump versus Biden? Because in my opinion, if Biden wins, for example, he has to put together a package sort of like the New Deal of the 1930s.
Yes, and I think I really like his green plan. The Biden's green plan thing, that he needs to name it. He needs people to name it. He needs people to write it up better and shit like that. But when he was pitching it, I kind of liked it. The idea behind it is that we are going to invest in all these technologies right now, even though they're expensive, because they're necessary, and that will create jobs, right? So redoing our infrastructure to be charge ready, so that way you can buy electric cars and charge them ubiquitously everywhere, for instance, right? Like, for instance, if every single parking spot in every major downtown area had at every meter a charge system, maybe not a charge system that charges like at like supercharger speeds, but maybe like, I don't know, 100 amps, 200 amps at 200 volts. That's pretty good. That how much is that? That's 40 kilowatts. Yeah, 40 kilowatt chargers. That's a little bit too much, actually. That's probably, but even like a 10 kilowatt charger, right? At every single parking meter would be kind of cool.
But isn't that expensive because you have to repave
Of course,
those
it's going to be incredibly expensive.
parking lots?
But that's jobs. That's high-paying tech jobs that we can be creating in America right now to build the infrastructure of tomorrow.
And not to mention that our infrastructure, our highways, need so much work.
Yeah,
done.
our infrastructure right now is like in a shitter.
It's crumbling. Yeah. It's past crumbling. It's soon going to start looking like Chernobyl.
Well, and the reason, there is a good reason for that. If you look at
nature will start reclaiming it.
Well, if you look at it's not like we don't do a good job building things or anything like that. It's if you look at the expected lifetime for any of these things, like for instance, look at the expected lifetime for the water supply pipes, the water mains in the city of Los Angeles, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have 100-year lifespan, right? Well, actually, I think they were supposed to have 80-year lifespan, and then they pushed it to 100-year lifespan.
And
right?
When were they installed? When did the time start?
Around the turn of the previous century. So we're already 20 years above the lifespan that they extended by 20 years from their original lifespan, right? So we're 40 years overdue for maintenance on those lines, right? And it's just extraordinarily expensive to make them, right? So 40 years ago, it would be a hell of a lot of work to redo those lines, because there were a lot of people living in those areas and stuff like that, but not as much as today. Today, redoing those same lines is next to impossible, and I have no idea how they're going to do it. Those water mains.
That's crazy. How long are they, and what? So I know very little about the infrastructure.
Water mains are those huge pipes that supply. They're about 20 inches in diameter.
Mm-hmm.
They can be smaller or larger, right? And they're usually steel. No, I'm sorry, not steel. Cast iron pipes, usually, and screwed together cast iron pipes and stuff like that. And then they go underneath the city and they supply water to the city. And then from that main pipe, so that's the water main, right? So it's huge, it's big, it supplies a lot of water. And then from that, you shoot off smaller pipes to individual homes or to buildings and things like that, right? And they usually go down main streets of some kind, right? So the water main, for instance, in LA might go down something like Sepulveda Boulevard, or some kind of major boulevard might have a water main underneath it. Or Sunset Boulevard might have a water main underneath it.
Okay.
And then it shoots off to the left and to the right onto every street. And then from that, so it's like a little tree, basically, right?
Okay.
So they fix the underground water mains when they need to be fixed, right? But like the main one means shutting off water for a lot of people, basically. So
tens of thousands of people, or hundreds of thousands of people. Sometimes.
So the only way you can do it really is, well, this is why they have been putting it off for 40 years.
Well, there's other difficulties I can imagine. Like, do we even have the technology and manufacturing companies who can make these pipes domestically?
Domestically, not anymore, no.
So we have to import them from China.
Well, if we started on this project...
Or Europe.
Well, that's why it will really take a vision. So the next 4 years, nothing really is going to happen, right? Nothing. But planning can start, and investment can start in the future. But we need a grand vision of America, with brand new infrastructure, with electric chargers on every parking meter, with new water lines, with water lines that will be easy and possible to maintain in 100 years from now, as opposed to impossible to maintain by thinking it through and by making smaller. Maybe instead of relying on mains, major mains, you have many, many tiny capillaries, basically, or smaller mains running to each individual street in the city. Like, this is something that research can be done, and we can start building facilities that can build pipes, and the government can say, okay, we're going to have a bidding contract. Whoever can bid, who can propose to us and provide the best type of pipe at the cheapest price wins this contract to supply pipes to the United States, and get a bunch of companies to invest money right now in our research and development to maybe see if we can figure out what kind of pipe can we use that is not going to decay. It's going to give us a really long, service life. Maybe is not susceptible to shocks and earthquakes and things like that, so it doesn't crack.
Wow,
And
that answers my question about if we're replacing these systems, are we replacing them with cast iron pipes?
we're replacing them with the same shit. Yeah.
That with technology we had 100+ years ago.
Well, I mean, some technology, like for instance, it might end up where we might say, cast iron pipes are just the best,
gold standard.
the gold standard, and
Yeah.
we just might as well go. And they're like leaded gas pipes as well, but it's not a big deal because if your water is not too acidic, then it doesn't leach. Well, is it alkaline? I don't remember. It doesn't leach lead out of the pipe, so you're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
It's only a problem if your water is fucked up that there's lead in the pipes. But this kind of grand vision that I got from Biden, it was inspiring. From Trump, it's just like, make America great again. Make America grow. How? Well, by making it great again.
I did not. Maybe I wasn't paying attention when he spelled out his grand vision. When Biden spelled out his grand vision. But I was really disappointed that none of them spoke about how they were going to.
Well, Biden's
transform
grand vision.
America.
Biden's grand vision was. It was more of a specifically about the Green New Deal, not the Green New Deal, which is the AOC that Ocasio-Cortez was promoting and shit like that, but his own Green Deal, and I really like that because. I don't think it should be necessarily the Green New Deal, but it should be stressing technology, basically. We stress technology to solve problems. We should stop saying that we're doing this because this is green, because that puts off some people for some reason. But instead say we're doing this because it's better for technology. We want to be a modern country. Think about it this way. America has really lost its step. In terms of if Donald Trump wants to make America great again, we need to bring innovation back to America. You never see things in America first anymore.
Well, that has to do with infrastructure. In the 1920s, Paris was a great, thriving, modern city because its infrastructure was brand new because it had just recently burned down and it was rebuilt. Chicago is the same thing. They built it around the turn of the last century, right?
Mm-hmm.
They had bridges and highways, and they were thinking about the future.
Yep. And then China is right now outstripping us because they're building up new stuff while we're still using our old crappy stuff.
So we have technology that's 100 years old, and it's due for a great renewal.
We basically need to remodel our country.
Yep.
That's what we need to do. We need to remodel our country, but in order to do that, you need a person who will make that a grand vision. And it's a grand vision. We're remodeling our country, and we're going to say we're going to remodel our country with our own resources, which means you can't just say, okay, tomorrow we starting remodeling the country. You need to buy the supplies. You need to buy pipe and asphalt and paint and tractors and trailers and all this other stuff.
And we all have to sacrifice and pitch in.
Yeah, and if that stuff is not made in America, then it should be made in America, and we should start by making that stuff in America. But the sacrifice in the pitching in right now, right, of everybody, which means paying higher taxes, so the government has some money to do this, right? Which means supporting the government as they're running more deficits if they're doing this for renewal of our infrastructure, right?
Yeah. And it also means having greater transparency from the government about who they hire and making sure that they're not hiring contractors who are giving them a kickback.
It's not even that. Making sure that they're hiring contractors that are the best contractors for the job, not contractors that gave them, like you said, a biggest kickback, or also not necessarily just the contractors who are the fanciest or
who have the best brand, basically.
We want contractors who do the best job, not have the best brand, and we want companies who do a really good job, not companies who have the most amount of money, so to speak.
That's true. And I think this is a great endeavor that would unite Americans together instead of separating them are being like they are right now with issues with social issues that are relevant to our time, but they divide us more than they unite us.
Yeah. And I think to do that and to solve those problems, what you really need is figuring out how to bring back jobs to the middle of the country because we have a very large country, and right now we have the hollowing out of not just the middle of the country, but just the rural areas. So you see places like all the Midwestern areas, they empty out to the cities. So like all of Illinois empties out to Chicago, all of Kansas empties out to Kansas City, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And the towns in the middle of the country are becoming less and less. Some of them becoming like ghost towns. Like we can drive, and eventually we will drive through some of them, and you'll see that there's a lot of houses that are just abandoned, and there's nobody there. There's some restaurants that have like 5 or 6 people go to them per day or something like that. And these towns are becoming more and more hollowed out. And the reason why they're becoming more and more hollowed out is, again, because there's no we're not producing anything in America anymore. Everything is an intellectual job, or a service job, right? So you're not gonna stay in a town like that to do a service job because there's not that many people to service, right? It's not a town you would want to run like a yoga studio or, a jujitsu studio or, start a restaurant in, because there's simply not that many customers. You're not going to do very well. So you move out to the large city and you do it there, right?
Right. Move to a college town or somewhere where there's some kind of industry.
Well, yeah,
that keeps
or
it going.
exactly. And then you do it there, right? But if you so as a result, people move out of these towns, right? If you're doing service, and if you're doing any kind of intellectual work, like for instance, being a lawyer or being a doctor or something like that, again, you need to be in the city because those kinds of professions are in the city, right? Because you need to go to a medical school, and then, like, for instance, you can be a country doctor or a rural doctor, but it doesn't pay very much, again, because there's not that many people around you. That's why they have those MD deserts that they talk about, like medical services deserts, where for maybe like 80 miles around you, 100 miles around you, you have no doctors in some of these areas, right? Why? Well, because there's not that many people who live there.
Right, and who would want to go there anyways?
Well, some of these places are pretty nice in terms of,
But you can't have like a high-end hospital that does all those surgical procedures out in the middle of nowhere.
Out of the middle of nowhere, you can't.
It's not cost effective.
No, exactly. But what about a town of 200,000 people, for instance? Do they not deserve a top of the line medical facility?
They do.
And I mean, I think there's enough people to support a top of the line medical facility if in a town of 200,000 or maybe 300,000, right? So these like smaller towns, 2-3, I mean, it's a city. 200,000, 300,000 is a city, right? But anything above 50,000 pretty much deserves at least some kind of medical facility. And I believe we need to promote, as a country, I wish we promoted more, or at least concentrated on this problem. And it is a problem, because what's happening right now is you have these magnet centers that pull all of the intelligent people to them, pull all of the hardworking people towards them, because they want
because they want to take advantage of opportunities,
right?
Financial opportunities.
And the people left behind in the middle of the country are left, especially kids, are left without any kind of role models on how to be better. Or all of their role models show them that, the only way to succeed is to leave here, right?
Yeah.
And then if you play that out in your mind, eventually you realize that, even if this goes completely fine for the next couple of decades, with no social strife, which I think there will be, but even if there isn't one.
Well, isn't the dream to be 100% urban? We've seen this drive towards urbanization in the last 30 years. It's happened with China.
But people do understand that it's a crazy dream, right? Or not.
You go where the money is.
Yeah, well, but
And if you can't figure out how to make money in the rural areas, then you're kind of left without choice. You either choose to be dead broke, or you go where the money is.
But what I'm saying is we have such a big concentration. I know, and you go where the money is. And you said that repeatedly, right? But what about if we could figure out a different way to do things, a way to do things where people can live in communities of, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60,000, 100,000 more often than we do now, right? Like start more smaller cities rather than have everybody move to really large cities, right? Like there's nothing wrong with like a city of 200,000 people will have most interesting things that you would want out of a city. You would have some art, you would have some dining, you would have interesting things, right? For people to do. You would have some playhouses. There will be some people who will want to put on plays. Maybe it won't be like it's a city, right? It's a city worth coming to, even if you're an act, because you can
Right,
still,
you won't be bored to tears.
yeah.
Not having anything.
And
to
I
do.
think if we engineered our country, if we concentrate on engineering our country where we have more 200,000 roughly people cities and less 8 million people cities like Los Angeles, or 2 million people cities like San Diego, or, God knows what the fuck San Francisco is right now, or New York with their 8+ million people. I don't even know how many people live in New York, right? So if we concentrated away from these mega cities and towards spreading the population kind of more evenly throughout the land of these United States, primarily for, because we want to occupy the land. We don't want to be clustered so much, because if you become so clustered, well, that's unhealthy, I feel.
Here I have mixed feelings. Because one of the great things about America is its empty, its vastness, its nature and its wilderness, unspoiled by humanity.
No, what about? I'm not saying we need to necessarily build new cities. That's the thing. We just need to repopulate our hollowed out second tier and third tier. Because basically, cities, you can think of them as like a town. A town would be, I don't know, like what? Under 50,000 people would be a town, right? Like a small town would be under 10,000 people, right? Under 50,000 would be a town. Over 50,000, 50 to like 100,000 would be like a third tier city. 100,000 to 300,000 would be like a second tier city, and 300,000 plus would be like first tier city. And then New York, Chicago, LA, places like that, those are like mega cities, right? So what I'm saying is mega cities will still stay there.
Yeah, mega cities have always existed.
In mega cities, whatever. But mega cities, it's like, not everybody wants to live in a mega city, right?
Right.
Some people. So what I'm saying is, how can we reallocate some people, or just kind of persuade some people, or provide opportunities for people to make it in the second and third tier cities, smaller cities.
Well, in the past, we created jobs.
Yeah,
like
you need jobs.
Yeah.
But you need jobs. What kind of jobs do you need?
Well, you need.
Well, you can't have service jobs, right?
Yeah.
Because service jobs, I mean, there's not going to be that many. You can't, you still have to do things other than just service.
You also
right?
need an attractive location and good PR.
Well, I think people will come for the jobs, and most locations in the United States are pretty nice, and well, I don't know.
Tornadoes in the middle of the country, hurricanes in the south and the southeast.
Yeah, but we have fires here in California, and we have
earthquakes, the potential for earthquakes and
earthquakes.
tsunamis.
It's all bad everywhere, and
Yeah.
everything has its pluses and its minuses.
Yeah.
But the point that I'm trying to make is, if you have a city, like a small city, that has a few industrial companies in there who manufacture things, those are higher tech, productive jobs that allow you to export something from the city, because the city has to import a lot of things that they need. So in order for you to import things that you need, you have to export something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have been switching slowly in America to saying like, oh, well, we export services. But you can't actually logically export services. The only kind of services you can export is remote services, right?
Right.
But if you can export them, so can a person from a third world country, right? And they can charge a lot less money for it.
With more education and less demand for pay.
The more education is highly questionable.
Or maybe bad English and
well, in the tech community, this is my common tribe against Indian programmers. Every Indian programmer out there, you go to Fiverr, you go to any of this remote hiring sites, you can verify this, by the way. This is what I'm saying. Like, or if you work with some of these larger outsourcing companies in India, they'll tell you the same thing. But if you look at all these programmers, they all have PhDs in
computer
science.
Or electrical engineering or whatever type of engineering.
Yeah, but all of them are PhD students, right?
Right.
Or PhD, not candidates, successful PhD graduates, right? They have doctorates in computer science. And I've seen their code, and it's god-awful. And the reason for that, it's not because Indian people are stupid. It's not. It's because that is a path to success in India. So as a result, there is a lot of schools who will literally just sell you a certificate. So basically, if you're a really smart Indian student, you're kind of fucked, because you're now in the sea of these assholes who just paid money to get their diploma and didn't really study or learn. Or if they do study, but they just memorize things. They tell them, like, they prep them in those schools, and they tell them memorize these things and then write a project and you're done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the problem, right? So I'm not saying no Indian programmer is good. What I'm saying is there's way too many of them who have gotten a PhD under less than honest circumstances, and it's difficult to separate them, one from the other.
You would imagine that large corporations in America would test their knowledge before hiring them.
They do test their knowledge, and this is why something that's very popular is paying for these interview prep scripts. But the problem the problem with that is that the reason you want to hire a PhD graduate or PhD
as a large tech company
doctorate,
in America,
is because having a PhD doesn't really prove much. What it proves is that you are able and capable of doing independent research and independent study, right? So what does that mean? That means that if an employer gives you a task, right? Like, for instance, what we are doing right now, like, let's figure out how to program an ESP32 module, how to code it, and how to, for instance, program it without pressing the boot button, right? Or doing something like that, right? The expectation is, if you have a PhD, you should be able to go out there and research this on your own and, quote unquote, train yourself to figure out how to do it, right? What is the most common answer that you hear on all kinds of job sites from all kinds of people? Oh, I haven't been trained for this. Oh, I haven't been trained for that. Oh, I haven't had my training on that piece of software yet. You see that a lot in hospitals, because none of these people are PhD. None of these people are self-sufficient. The world is full of dogs. You know how, like, dogs, when they don't know how to do something, when they don't know how to get, like, they did this experiment where they put a cage, and then inside the cage there's a treat. and the dog is outside the cage. And the dog would be running around the cage trying to get into it. He would do that for like maybe 30 seconds or so. And then he would sit and cry and look at its owner and be like, okay, owner, tell me what to do. Right? And then when they did the same experiment with wolves, and wolves would come up to the cage and they would run it and they would bash it and they would bash it with their nose and their paw and they would try to rip it and they wouldn't even consider looking at a human for, even if these are domesticated wolves, right? They wouldn't even consider looking for a human because they're like, no, I'll figure this shit out on my own. I don't need any help. Right? And it's the same thing here. When you hire a PhD, what you want to do is you want to hire a wolf. You want to hire a person who you tell them what needs to be done and they get out and do it, instead of coming back to you and saying, oh, I haven't been trained in how to use this device yet.
Oh, I see. So you're hiring somebody who has a certification that says independent thinker.
Yeah, and instead, they're literally the exact opposite of independent thinkers. This is people who paid a bunch of money to memorize a bunch of data to shove into their head so they can get this particular job at a particular company. Right, and that's it. They're not interested in they're not interested in researching and finding out things. They don't have this craving for like figuring things out. They just want to get paid.
Gotcha.
And
I think that
go ahead.
most of the most humans in general are dogs. Like I'm going to say 80 to 90% of people are dogs.
Well, that's true. And I agree with you. That is absolutely true. And that's why I was pointing out that we need more jobs for basically for smart, well-trained dogs. And right now, the only well-paying jobs that we have are the jobs for wolves. But we don't have enough wolves, if that analogy carries.
That means modifying our educational system, completely overhauling our educational system.
Well, that could create more wolves.
So that we can, tap into those wolves.
Yeah, that could create more of those people. But what I'm saying is there's a bunch of, like you said, 90%, let's say, of the population are dogs, or like people who
have
just
dog-like characteristics,
who want to do things that they've only been trained on. They don't want to find things, like they don't want to figure out how to do things on their own. It's basically people who figure shit out. Those are people who like, I need somebody to tell me how to do things.
Right, yeah.
So I don't make a mistake. So
in this case, Jack is a wolf and I'm a dog.
So regardless, if 90% of the population are like that, we can't say, oh, well, fuck that 90%. Let's concentrate on these 10% and see what we can squeeze out of them. No, you need to address the problem. And the problem is that 90% of the population, what they want to do is they want to pay attention, study, to have somebody tell them how to do something important. And then they want to sit there and do that important thing. And if they do a good job doing that important thing, they want people to respect them for it and say,
reward them and pat them in the back and say, oh, good dog.
Yeah, here's some money and here's some petting and here's your status in the community. And that's enough. That's enough for most people. And that is necessary for most people too, because here's the thing. Somebody has to dig ditches. Somebody has to write code that is not particularly creative because it's just, the settings screen. Somebody has to write the settings screens. And that's fine too. My main objection towards, by the way, Indian programmers is just because, like I said, you can have a guy tell you that he has a PhD in computer science, and he could be a brilliant person who knows how to do everything and can like assembly code everything. And then you can have a guy who says he has a computer science PhD, and you give him an assignment, and he comes back with like shit that he copied and pasted from GitHub and doesn't understand what it does.
Case in point, British Airways.
Oh yeah, British
going
Airways.
Down. What, in 2014 maybe?
2015 or 16, but yeah, British Airways.
During the summer at the height of travel, they had recently or within the last year outsourced all of their IT to India.
Mm-hmm.
And the Indian company was not able to get them up and running.
Yep.
And in record time? Like it took them like 1 to 3 days to resolve
It
their
took them
IT.
3 days to resolve the problem, and it was a big problem. It shut down all the terminals.
I don't know exactly what went wrong, but
Their database server went down
mhm.
of some kind.
Yeah,
I
but
forgot.
there were some very unhappy travelers.
Yep. And in that case, they outsourced all their tech support to India. And what happened there? First, all of these British people in Britain lost their job. Maybe they weren't geniuses. Maybe they weren't like touched by Muse fucking programmers, but they
There
were
were no Steve Wozniak.
yeah, but they were decent developers who were probably working for British Airways. And had this happened, they could have had somebody from Britain right then and there inside the airport trying to figure things out or resetting the servers on their end.
Without having to deal with the time delay or like, the regional time offset.
Delay,
Yeah.
but also without having to deal with the shitty quality of Indian outsourced work. And the reason, again, I'm calling it shitty quality because guess what? You can call me racist, but all the great programmers from India who are any good, they're fucking here. When you're outsourcing to India, you're not getting the first-rate programmers that country can produce, or the second, or the third. You're getting the dumbasses who couldn't import themselves into the United States.
Mm.
So
Food for thought.
yeah, just keep that in mind. Even if you say, "Oh no, that racist, terrible person, he doesn't know anything about." Yeah, I know plenty. I hired these people. They're terrible. The ones here are great. There's a reason for that. Just because you get a PhD diploma with your Happy Meal doesn't mean from McDonald's doesn't mean that everybody there is a fucking genius. And the ones who are actually fucking geniuses, they're here. They're in Silicon Valley. They're in Washington.
Hey, you have some very passionate thoughts about Indian programmers.
Because of
Anyways,
frustrations. Let's put it that way.
Anyways,
But my
let's
point.
come back to what we thought about the presidential debate and wrap it up.
Well, I was going to wrap it up by saying that. I was going to finish that thought by saying that, in addition to service jobs, we need in these smaller
Community
cities. Community cities. Let's call them that, and they shouldn't be suburbs because right now what we have is like. Oh, here's a suburb of Chicago, that has some number like 200,000, 300,000 people in it. And it's like, oh, it's a separate city, but it's a suburb of Chicago. So then Chicago just overpowers everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you still have shitty traffic and you still have all this other stuff, but you're in a suburb of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to see more.
So you want it to be regionally different? Like you have to give them a margin or a spacer.
Literally, yeah. Like I want 100,000 to 200,000 people city.
Cluster.
And I want to have 50 miles or so of empty space or farmland or other things. And then another city and then farmland and other things.
Do you want them to be built in circles? You
Yeah,
want to physically build them in circles?
no, because we're not protecting from Mongols.
European cities are built in circles.
Because they were protecting from Mongols or other invaders, mostly other European invaders.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just like this idea that we populate the country a little bit more evenly, right?
It would be a sight to see. For me, it seems like it's a long way off.
Especially if
now.
especially if we communicate the country then with high speed rail. So if we had high speed rail going from city to city to city, so for instance, you could live but encourage people to work and stay in these communities that they're part of, right?
Unless we all become remote workers for large corporations, this won't be possible.
Well, I think that's going to happen. So I think we're going to have a lot of remote workers. So you're gonna have some people move out that way, right? But if we also bring manufacturing back, even if it's more or less automated manufacturing, but manufacturing will never be fully automated. You'll still need people, at least at this point right now, right? Monitoring things, right? So if we brought back manufacturing here to the United States, then we can have sponsorship programs where, for instance, if you're a company that's moving into a particular location and you build your facility there, the government can help you purchase land and do other things, just like we did before, right? But the idea is you get these manufacturing plants planted in different communities, and then they attract workers. to work there, and it's going to be more high-end workers, right? But you can have these regions of the country, like, oh, this region of the country specializes in manufacturing electronic products, and here we have a lot of heavy industry, and we build Caterpillar tractors and things like that. You can have these little hubs built all over the place, right? Just like they have right now in China. Shenzhen is like a super city, right? But outside of Shenzhen, there's a lot of smaller cities. There's cities who are like, oh, this is a city of motors. We make a lot of motors here. This is a city of like.
I think that would also be, if we had smaller cities like that, it would be a lot easier to make people understand how electricity is generated, how infrastructure is super important.
Because it'll be closer to them.
Because it'll be closer to them, and how food is produced, and it would be easier to go green, to have
for sure
solar panels or windmills or geothermal or whatever it is that people have in the region that, you know, they've settled.
People always make this argument, and I think it's a little bit of a bullshit argument. They always make an argument saying how it's always more green or more efficient to live in large cities. And I kind of call bullshit on that, because I think it's obviously more efficient to live in a urban area versus like a rural area, because you drive less and such, and you can supply some well, you can share some electricity. You don't have to have as many lines running to you and stuff like that, right? You can share some of the resources, basically. Well, the idea is like, you know, you need one like, for instance, take this area over here. We noticed that on poles, basically it's one house per transformer. Right?
Yeah.
Because after, for those who don't know, when you look at the power poles on top, those cables are running at 1,000 or 10,000 volts, I believe. So they're the high voltage cables, even the ones that they're not ultra high voltage, because the true high, like what people usually say when they say high voltage power lines, those 200,000, 300,000, you know, volt.
And do those run along the highway, or usually like?
Yeah, or through they usually run them as straight as possible, basically.
Oh, okay.
You
see the wilderness.
Yeah, sometimes you see them just clear cut through the wilderness and run those, right? So those are the major arteries. Those the lines that carry gigawatts of power, like places. Mm-hmm. And then you take that, you splinter off of that, you step it down to like 10,000 volts, and you shoot it into a neighborhood. And then once you come down into the neighborhood, if you want to connect to that power, you need a transformer. You put another transformer. You take it from 10,000 volts down to 120 volts, or 220 volts, 240 volts that you get in your outlets, right? You get 120 in the United States, but you're getting half the amplitude, because it splits at the pole. And you have two lives, so if you combine the two lives, you get 220. It's details, or 240 rather. It's details that's not necessary. But the point I was trying to make is that transformer that switches between 10,000 volts and 120. It's supposed to be able to serve like an entire block. Many houses, right? Mm-hmm. But in this area right here, we're getting basically one transformer per household, because once you transform electricity to 120 volts, you can only run it so far. About 200, 300, 400 feet is kind of like good. Once you go over 500 feet, you start stretching it quite a bit. Right?
So the voltage drops?
Yeah, because you get voltage drops in the cables, right? Or you have to use extraordinarily thick cables, which is, of course, not going to happen either. So what happens is, and this is why we carry electricity at like, you know, 250,000 volts, because it reduces voltage drop in the cables as a result of that. So in a rural community like that, I mean, you're spending quite a bit more resources by putting those poles and having to put those quite expensive transformers on every pole for every household. Whereas in a more rural area, that same transformer would be able to serve probably 24 households without any significant problem, more or less. So maybe a dozen at least, right?
I remember when we lived in the city, we had a transformer that served at least 5 or 10 houses
Yeah, it's at least 10
in our
houses, yeah.
block.
10 houses, I would say is like the minimum,
Yeah.
really. Because they usually put them on a pole per block street and then
Yeah.
connect left and right side of the street to the
Mm-hmm.
same wire. So the point is that really, really rural areas, not particularly efficient in terms of greenhouse or just being green necessarily, but it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But really, really urban areas like LA, where everybody stands in traffic for hours at a time, don't tell me that that's efficient.
Yeah. No.
No.
Not unless they have really efficient mass transport.
But yeah, which LA, New York does, but then there's still constant traffic, right?
Right. Yeah.
So what you need is first of all you need mega cities, but we need to make it less attractive to live in mega cities. My personal idea. So mega cities shouldn't have private cars. You just don't get a car if you want to live in a mega city. You just have bicycles. You convert all mega cities into bicycle accessible only.
Right. I just, well, one of the reasons I like your idea is that I think it would heal humanity. It would make people healthier
Oh yeah.
and feel more connected.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
in a metropolis or a megacity, you kind of get lost.
Absolutely.
You kind of become like a number, like just a human, but just one more human.
Yeah. And in a 50,000 people town, you can be maybe not particularly known, but it's easier.
Yeah.
It's easier to make it. So a lot of people will be happy. I mean, a lot of people will still move out to the big cities and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people will be more happy, I think, in this middle ground.
Because they can have more space as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of difficult to live in a shoebox.
Mhm.
Unless, of course, the only thing you're doing in your shoebox is going back and sleeping in your shoebox.
Yeah, which is what most people, I guess, do in LA and
Yeah.
New York and places like that, and San Francisco especially, I guess.
But if you want to putter around your house and, do things around your house, it's important to have some space.
Well, it's also important to have space not only physically, but also financially, right? So if you are in one of these mega cities, you're spending so much on rent, you're spending so much on just daily living and on food and on cab fares and all this other stuff, that it's very hard for you to really take a chance in life, right? Maybe you always wanted to start a business, but you have a job and you work in your job and you're like this close always away from, not paying your rent, and you're not going to take a leap and rent out a place that might be renting for $20,000 or $30,000 a month to start a restaurant, right? And those who do are the ones who raised a bunch of money, and often enough they go out of business because they're paying so much money for those spaces. Like an average restaurant space in Manhattan right now goes for like $50,000 a month. That's insane. I mean, think about how. And what if you want to run a Mexican restaurant, right? Imagine how much shit you have to sell, just to make your rent. I mean, so in areas of the country that are less, where you're paying for the space, not for the privilege of having the space. You're just paying for the space itself. Saying, oh, you need a roof over your head where you can make a Mexican restaurant? Great. Here it is. It'll be $1,200 a month, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you can take a chance. You can be like, oh, I was always very good at cooking. I really want to make a thing out of it. I think I can do it. I can try it here. There's enough people who live here. If it's good, then they'll like it and they'll support me. And if they don't, then they don't. It's one of those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to try. You can more easily try to start another kind of business. It doesn't have to be a restaurant. You can start a little manufacturing company that makes things, right? If you're paying $1,200 a month for your office rent, maybe you can swing that, and maybe you can do that. But if you need to pay $10,000-15,000 a month for your office rent, to do, like, for instance, a MacBook repair shop, right? Well, that's not gonna happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's all about those trade-offs. Yeah, this big mega city is amazing because you can have access to so many people and you can have all kinds of niche ideas, right? But small cities offer you more cushion for failure and more interesting, but you have to structure them properly. And I want that grand vision. And I want that grand vision from Democrats or from Republicans. Not necessarily this
Maybe
grand
we'll
vision.
have to write that grand vision. We'll be the Karl Marx of the 21st century. Karl Marx 2.0.
Okay. All right, so that was mine. I enjoyed Biden's little vision. It made me a little inspired. It made me depressed how old and fucking decrepit Biden is. So I'm not gonna lie and say like, oh my God, Biden's so much better than Trump. He's not, but as a person, and he's a lying bastard who's a used car salesman. But as a person, he's just a better person than Trump. I just really dislike
Less-
Trump as a person.
Less self-centered.
Yeah. I really hate selfish people, not even
It
selfish.
hurts Jack's soul. He's very sensitive like that.
Yes. And for the record, I hated Trump ever since his Apprentice days. Because when I saw him first on Apprentice, I was like, oh my God, this dude knows nothing about business. I didn't even know anything about him. Later on, I did some research, like years later, and I was like, wow, I called that right on the nose. The dude has been bankrupt many times, bankrupted many companies, and now is trying to sell steaks online. I mean, it's fucking ridiculous. I never respected the guy as a business person. And when he ran for president, quite honestly, I kind of figured that he's going to win. I called it in 2016. But this year, I see a lot of people abandoning him because of his utter lack of being able to handle coronavirus in any way, shape, or form. That comment when he said, "I take no responsibility. I'm not responsible for anything," and this was during the coronavirus thing, and that was just amazing. And his supporters, of course, clapped like, "Yeah, yeah, you're not a real man. You don't stand behind anything. Yeah," but he's just such a pussy. I don't even know how to describe him, and I do hope that Biden wins, but if he does, I really hate that Kamala Harris person, and I'm pretty sure she's going to be president because I think he's going to basically the crow could step down sometimes halfway through the presidency.
It's really sad what we're seeing with the
I mean, we had so many candidates who were better.
With the political parties. The DNC is super corrupt, and
that is true.
And I'm sure the same thing can be said about the Republican Party.
Yeah, the GOP, the Republican Party, which is the grand old party, GOP. Fucking morons. Anyways, yeah.
Well, we can't wait till the second debate. The vice presidential debates are happening tomorrow, I think.
That'll be interesting.
Wednesday, I think, not tomorrow.
No, the vice presidential debates are tomorrow.
Are they?
I
thought it was the 7th. Maybe it's on the 6th. Maybe I'm wrong.
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
It'll be interesting because Kamala Harris and Mike Pence are normal humans.
I'm expecting see, I don't hate Mike Pence. That's the thing. I disagree with him vehemently. I think he's wrong about every single viewpoint that he has. But I honestly think like he's a decent human being. Like I think that Mike Pence will stop and like try to help me if my car was broken down by the side of the road. I think Donald Trump wouldn't give a flying fuck about anybody except himself. Let's put it that way. That's why I really despise Donald Trump. And Mike Pence as a president, I wouldn't want because I really don't like what he stands for. But quite honestly, I would take him over Trump. And Harris, I'm having like I really don't like her as a person. But I would be very surprised if she doesn't do well during the debate because she's a prosecutor. I mean, you have to be good on your feet if you're a prosecutor. I have friends who are prosecutors. They're good on their feet in court. Like, you have to be good at that kind of stuff.
She is dynamic and she is very energetic. So
we'll see.
We'll see if she delivers a smashing performance.
I think what she needs to do, like basically, she needs to be so good that the day after the debates, everybody in the news talks about how amazing she is. because she is basically the face of the president at the moment. Like people on the Democratic side, Biden voters basically understand it in their brain that they're basically voting for her. It's Biden for now, and it's her for definitely the last 2 years of Biden's administration, and probably for the she's probably going to be the candidate for the 2024 election.
Look at that. We're going to have a person of color. She is half black, half Indian, actually.
Oh, well, God, so maybe her degree's faked.
And a female. Anyways, that's it for me for today.
All right, let's kill this. We'll try to record one right after the vice presidential debates.
Yeah.
And have
we'll
it be a little bit less meandering. All right. Okay. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.